Hello and welcome to the show. Now, for those of you that regularly watch my videos, you will know that I am a very, very big fan of muscle cars. However, one thing that really does annoy me, and I'm going to be using some air quotes here, not that you can see them though, is that supposed car people like to say that American cars can't turn around corners. And this confuses me because, well, quite clearly, they can. No, the American muscle cars were not the most sophisticated of vehicles. They were designed to get as much power into a car as possible for as little money as possible. And they were very, very successful at that. And yes, they mostly went and did drag racing. However, you can get the cars around the corner. No, they're not the easiest thing in the world to drive, of course, do not get me wrong, but you can drive them around a track. If you drive them within their limits, look, here is a Dodge Charger, it's going around a corner without any problems. You've got to drive them, to their limits. Hell, they did a whole racing series called Trans Am with these bloody cars. So, yes, American cars can very much go around corners. But still, people scoff at them, and yes, you could argue this Mini here will lap Laguna Seca 2-3 seconds a lap faster than the Charger. And yes, that is a 1.6 litre front-wheel drive hatchback with just over 200 horsepower. It's got half the power of the Dodge, it's got half the cylinders, it's got a quarter of the capacity, yet it'll still go around this circuit far, far quicker than the Charger. But then, why on earth would we ever be surprised by that? The Mini is a modern car. It was made in 2012, it's some over 40 years newer than the Charger. And the same goes for the likes of the Japanese sports cars, the Nissan Skyline, Toyota Supra, Honda S2000. Yeah, all of them cars will go around a track quicker than the classic American muscle cars. But why on earth are we surprised by this? These cars are far more modern, got much more modern technology, more modern tyres and brakes and suspension and so on and so forth. Hell, you take a 60s Formula 1 car, modern supercars will beat it. So, yeah, I don't quite know why people decide to compare these muscle cars to the modern vehicles. So, I wanted to do a little test. Take some of the classic muscle cars and go racing against vehicles from the era. We were going to do two races. One at a very much straight-line speed circuit, the Indianapolis track, and one at a very much handling circuit. Around this straight-line speed circuit, we expect the muscle cars to do really quite well. I will point out we did our best to get vehicles from around the time period. We are limited, though, by what there is available in Forza. So there are some cars in this that are a little bit more modern, like a Lancia Stratos, and there are some cars that are a little bit older, like a Jaguar E-Type, but, we're working with what we have available. There was the odd little bump on the way through Turn 1, as there often is at Indianapolis. Turn 1 here is a little bit of a nasty bugger. I will be honest, I found myself fighting with a Ford Country Squire, as a BMW 2002 Turbo, as we tried to go 3 wide. The Ford is up the inside, as everything's tried to split. I think a Lamborghini, the Miura, I don't know if he got on the curb or if he got turned sideways. We all kind of had to take avoiding action, and that kind of made a little bit of a mess of the field on this opening lap. I got myself up the inside of the Country boat to get the pass done. I was now fighting with a Dodge Coronet, and we had a Lamborghini Miura for company. Now, Lancia Fulvia at this early stage of the race was actually keeping up with us little group. The Indianapolis track is a really weird layout here. We weren't quite sure. The Lamborghini took the shortcut before realizing we were all taking the normal route, so he did the decent thing and just sort of backed off before carrying on. Yeah, we didn't quite realise how weird the track was going to be through that area. Anyway, as I was saying, Lancia Fulvia, he was right up there with this group on the opening lap, but then we came to the long straight, and the poor little Lancia didn't stand a chance. Neither did this Camaro. As I go to the outside, the other Dodge is to the inside, and we're 3 wide in the banking, and cars a little bit wibbly and wobbly through here. I had to have a lift stuck on the outside. I couldn't make it stick. But we've got so much more speed. I mean, you can look at the size of the gap we had pulled back to the Fulvia because of the speed. Yes, these cars were quite scary going around that banking 3 wide. It was not the most fun thing I've ever done in a car. I very nearly ended up in the wall at relatively high speeds, but these have so much speed that we absolutely mullered the Fulvia. Now, further back was the European contingent. This little group, the Stratos, I think, ended up out on the grass on the first lap, was trying to avoid all of the slight chaos, and he was cutting his way through the field, as you would perhaps expect expect from the Lancia, but he was pretty much mostly coming up against European cars at this stage. All of the American muscle cars were towards the front, and this is kind of what we were expecting, let's be honest. In a race like this, I think a Mustang Boss may have got damaged and had to take a trip through the pits, but on the most part, it was the American muscle cars that were up the front, and you can see this group, the E-Type may have run a little bit wide on this particular lap. The E-Type Stratos and everything were keeping up with a GTO Judge, but the second they're going to get on the straight, the GTO is going to fly away, and the problem is that these cars weren't good enough through the corners to make up for the deficit in a straight line. Yes, okay, the Stratos handled quite well through the turns, but it wasn't that much better. It wasn't drastically better than the muscle cars, and this is something that I was finding nearer the front. So I lost a little bit of time to the Coronet. The Ferrari, the 250, was leading the race. He had a spin completely on his own, got it wrong over some curbs, and that spat the car out sideways. He joined in with this little battle for third. Lamborghini Miura leading the Ferrari, then there was my Dodge, and then the Ferrari Daytona that was very, very fast in a straight line. Daytona, the fastest car here, in a straight line. Problem was, he was expecting to be able to quite easily outbrake and outmaneuver the Charger. That simply wasn't the case. These cars, you know, the Ferraris and so on, weren't that much better handling than the muscle cars. They still weren't that nice to drive through the corners. They were still difficult cars to get things right. You saw with the Ferrari there, he just couldn't quite get it stopped trying to go around the outside. There wasn't the huge drastic grip difference that you perhaps were expecting from these cars. Yes, okay, the Miura here and the 250 are fighting rather hard for this third place, and that was allowing me to keep myself in the battle. In all honesty, those two cars were quicker than my Dodge, but as they fought, as they were trading places and so on, I could keep up. I could keep putting pressure on the pair of them, and through the corners, honestly, they weren't that much better. Down the straights, the Lamborghini and certainly the Ferrari Daytona behind me were much quicker cars. The Ferrari 250 was better off the corner, although I did have slightly better top speed as we run down this back straight. Again, the Daytona was trying to go around the outside. I think he may have put a wheel on the grass slightly and ended up out a little bit wide through there. But yeah, I was on the back of the Miura. The Miura touches the curve, the Miura's going sideways. I get a good run. I end up having to back off ever so slightly so I don't run into the back of a very, very expensive Lamborghini, and then he gets a better run through the next corner there. But yeah, the European cars, they were not handling that much better. They were still awkward vehicles to drive. I mean, you can see this little group of cars here. This was a fantastic battle between these four vehicles: BMW 2002, Jaguar E-Type, Ferrari Dino, and Aston Martin DB5. I mean, these were well behind all of the muscle cars. Muscle cars were long gone up the road. The Aston Martin here, very, very quick in a straight line, but just watch the amount of lean that these cars were getting through the turns. The Jaguar, the Aston, the BMW, the Ferrari was the best handling of the lot of them, but I mean, you can still see the amount of leading that is going on in these cars through the corners. Apparently the Aston Martin was not a particularly nice car to drive either. All of these vehicles that are this age, none of them handle amazingly well. And the muscle cars can make up for this because they have a lot of power. However, these cars were struggling a little bit. The Aston Martin wasn't good through the corners. It was okay in a straight line, but it was never going to keep up with the likes of the muscle cars, and it had nowhere near the power and the acceleration that the muscle car had, so he dropped back. Yeah, he could fight with these guys, but yeah, when it came to actually trying to fight with the muscle cars, this lot didn't really stand much of a chance. These guys, as I said, fantastic battle between this lot, going three wide almost down the back straight. The E-Type here, the fastest of this little group in a straight line. The Dino trying to go round the outside of two cars through there, never quite likely to work as they're all swapping sides, and in doing so he's slowed himself down. Now the Aston Martin is getting back involved. The Jaguar's finally got his pass done successfully on the BMW as they round back onto the straight, and the battle would continue. The Lancia Stratos was mixing it up there with the tail end of the muscle cars, got past the Camaro, was fighting with a Pontiac GTO, but could never get past the Pontiac. It just couldn't quite do it. I mean, the Stratos here is the most modern car in this lot of vehicles. I think it may have clobbered the curb a little bit and got fired into the side of the Pontiac. Doesn't really do much to the big heavy Pontiac. Yeah, he could keep up through the corners, but could never make up a huge amount of time or enough time through here to stand a chance when they came to the straights. And you know, that's kind of a little bit what we were expecting here. Let's be honest. At a circuit like this, where straight line speed is very, very important. Now, we're expecting the muscle cars to put up a very good fight. As you see, the Stratos carries good speed onto the banking, and then we say bye-bye to the Pontiac, as it just got so much more power than the Lancia. He can pull away without too many problems at the front, and it was a Dodge Dart that was leading the way very, very quick around here. As I said, the Ferrari 250 GT had led the way, had spun out, and kind of gifted the lead to the Dart, although the Dart was catching him quite quickly before the Ferrari spun out anyway. The Dart was actually buzzing in the limiter. Dart was one of the slower cars here at a straight line. Certainly the top few vehicles was really struggling with very, very short gear ratios in this car. He was buzzing the limiter, but was good enough through the corners to keep up with some very, very decent lap time, and the rest of us further back, we didn't really stand a chance of keeping up with the Dodge. Sadly, I think the Ferrari Daytona may have lagged out of this race. This was the battle for third. It was the Dodge Coronet in second that again buggered off up the road while this lot continued to fight. I didn't have the speed of the Ferrari or the Lamborghini. I couldn't quite keep up with these two. But at the end of the day, the Ferrari pushed it too much, tried to go around the outside of the Lamborghini, and the 250's gone for its second spin of the race, just trying his very hardest to get past that Miura. Couldn't quite hold it. Loses out to a Corvette, and a Mercury Cougar comes past as well. But yeah, these Ferraris and Lamborghini and so on, they weren't easy cars to drive. So we move on to our second race, to the handling track. We went to the Lime Rock Alternate Circuit, so lots of slow chicanes. You would expect the muscle cars to be in an awful lot of trouble around a circuit like this. Yes, there is still a sort of start-finish straight, and yes, there is a bit of a nasty hill, but there are lots of medium and slow-speed corners. You would expect the European cars to be faring relatively well around this particular track. And to start with, well, the Ferrari Daytona, the Lamborghini Miura, and the Stratos all started towards the front of the field, which certainly helped them out as the rest of us all got a little bit tangled up further down the order. But the Dart was still with them. The Dart was proving to go very, very quickly. The Mercury Cougar was keeping up with this lot as well. And then comes that power from the muscle cars as we run up towards the next chicane, even on these short straights. I mean, as the Dart was up the inside of the Stratos, actually got up the inside of the Miura as well, though the Miura would continue to fight him back. The Dart and the Lamborghini get tangled a little bit on the exit. They kind of get the cars stuck together, and they couldn't quite pull off in time before ending up across the grass. That slowed the Dodge down, allowing the Stratos to go around the outside at the final turn, and it didn't really matter anyway, though, for the Dodge, as here comes the straight line speed. Here comes the Mercury as well as they run down towards turn one. Yes, the brakes on the Stratos are much better. You can see how much later he can get on the brakes. He can defend off the Mercury just about, but he's still fighting, trying to find his way past that Dart as the Dart covers the inside for the next corner. And now the Lancia was going a little bit sideways. The Miura was going a little bit sideways ahead of that. This is the Mercury as well. The racing was pretty very close between these guys. Unfortunately, everything would go a little bit disastrously wrong. The Dart had a dive at the inside of the Lamborghini. I think the Lamborghini may have lagged ever so slightly. Dart and Lancia get tangled up, and the Dart kind of goes for a little bit of airborne time. That may have broken these two cars quite a lot. A little bit of a shame. Two of the faster cars around here did get a little bit broken. They both had to take a trip through the pit lane, I believe, because that was a fairly hefty impact on that one. A little bit unfortunate with a slight laggy incident. As you can imagine, yeah, the little European cars, much more handling orientated cars, were faring better. This time, the Renault Alpine that had been pretty much non-existent at Indianapolis was fighting up there with the Mustang Boss and a Pontiac GTO. I don't think the Renault quite realised where the Pontiac was in that particular instant. Gave him a little bit of a nudge, had to go across the grass, but still the Pontiac was piling on the pressure. And these cars were not that much better through the corners. As we come up the hill, the Pontiac's to the inside, and he's going to outdrag the Renault. Corvette is coming as well very, very quickly. He would get past the Renault before the corner, although couldn't quite get it stopped. Pontiac, big slides from that as the Renault's fighting back across the chicane there. Sure, the Renault Alpine, he's going to be closing the gap through that chicane, but it's not by enough. It's not by enough to find a way past, really, this Pontiac. Now we're back on to the start-finish straight, and the Pontiac is off, and the Corvette is well past the Alpine. Corvette's almost up the inside of the Pontiac by the time they get to turn one. I mean, this is pretty much about as much as a handling track as I can get on Forza 6. It's very much a handling-orientated track. And even here, you know, these little European cars, they just couldn't quite do anything. They couldn't carry the corner speed. We see BMW 2002 and Lancia Fulvia, they were having a battle. The Dart, having gone through the pits, was picking these guys off with relative ease. It's just right up alongside the BMW. Can't quite get it done around the outside into this chicane, but the BMW has to go very, very deep. It's slow off the corner, and it's not going to matter anyway with the power of that Dart. The BMW and the Fulvia, they can't carry the corner speed necessary to keep that far ahead of the likes of the Dart. Yeah, the Dart is probably the fastest muscle car we had here. There's no doubt about that one. You can see the size of the gap he can pull in a couple of corners. Yeah, you're in trouble when the cars you're racing are far faster than you at a straight line and pretty much the same speed as you through a corner. You know, the BMW and Fulvia, they were doing quite well in this race, but they couldn't match the pace of the Dart. They couldn't match the pace of my Dodge either. I was well up the road from them. For the second race in a row, I found myself battling with the Daytona. I was, making a nuisance of myself, really, for the Ferrari. In the end, I was in third at this point of the race. I ran too deep into turn one, finally yielding the position to the Ferrari. We were both getting caught by a Corvette as well at this stage of the race, but the Ferrari then pushed it a little bit too hard through the next corner, stuck a wheel on the curb. The curbing around here is quite nasty. That kind of threw him out a little bit for the next corner. Then he's got a wheel on the other side of the grass, and he's still trying to get it all back together, and the Ferrari's off bouncing across the grass. And it's an easy mistake to make. Plenty of people made it, but the Ferraris weren't that much easier to drive than these muscle cars. And again, you see the Corvette was catching us quite quickly, although he would run out of laps before he could do anything about us. At the front, and it was the Lamborghini Miura that was leading the way. He was being quite closely followed, though, by a Mercury Cougar. The Mercury was really putting up a fight as the Lamborghini was a little bit wide into this this second corner. You know, the Miura was coming under increasing pressure. In all honesty, both the Miura and the Daytona, as I said, were probably the fastest cars here in a straight line, and they could make the most of that coming out of some of these corners just to try and pull that little bit of a gap back to the Mercury. This was on the final lap. The Mercury was trying to find a way past. He was having a tough time, though, trying to get past this Lamborghini. And I mean, sure, in open air, the Lamborghini is the faster of the two cars here. The problem is that Lamborghini was having to defend. He was coming under constant pressure from the Mercury. The Mercury tried everything he could through the chicane at the end there, and it just pushed it too hard. He knew he had one chance. He tried it, ended up out across the curb and on the grass. But yeah, the Lamborghini, when being compromised and coming under increasing pressure from the Mercury, couldn't pull a gap to that car. Further back, as I said, the BMW and the Lancia Fulvia both fared better in this race. These guys came in, I think, about 6th and 7th for these two, but you can see the size of the gap to the cars ahead. The Dart was up ahead, my Dodge was up there as well. Yeah, they fared better, but they still didn't really stand much of a chance. Even at a handling track like this, as I said, you know, they weren't much of any better through the corners particularly, and then you lose out because you don't have anywhere near the power of the muscle cars. So yeah, they did struggle a little bit. This was a fun battle further back. The Stratos, recovering from his pit stop, would get past the Ford. The Ford Country Squad actually did pretty well around here. It was fighting with an Aston DB5. I think there's the GTO judges in here. The Alpine Surround and the Corvettes are all squabbling over various positions. I think in the end, the Corvette and the judge got together, allowing the Alpine to get past the pair of them on the final lap. The Country Squire tried his very, very best, pushed it really hard through that final turn, dipped a wheel over the outside curb, and just didn't quite have the speed of the Aston Martin. Aston would beat out the Country Squire. And yeah, I mean, these guys, but you saw they kept ahead of the GTO and the I think there's a Mustang Boss somewhere around, and the Corvette and so on. But what sort of conclusions can we draw from all of this? Well, I'll be the first to admit that a racing situation is not the most scientific way of doing this. I could have taken the cars, and hot lapped them each around each track, and then compared the lap times. But I wanted to do a race because that gives you a better, almost general feel for how these cars fare. You know, when you're coming under pressure from the vehicles around you, when you have to attack or when you have to defend, and so on. You drive slightly differently, of course, than when you're hot lapping. And the main conclusion that I can draw from all of this is that, you know, the American muscle cars really aren't that bad. Or when it comes to dealing with the corners, none of the vehicles here were easy to drive. Yes, there were varying driver skill levels in this, but everyone who took part in this, I invited specifically because they're all good drivers. You put any of them in the Mini and put them at Lime Rock, they would have won. Anybody could have driven the Mini to win at Lime Rock because, you know, it's a much easier, much nicer car to drive around that sort of a circuit. You know, the Lamborghini Miura, Ferrari Daytona, yeah, on a hot lap, them two will be the quickest cars here. No doubt about that, but they weren't easy cars to drive. You know, yeah, the suspension and the brakes on the muscle cars aren't great. You know, they do lean a lot through the corners, but everything from that time period did. You watch the Ferrari Daytona going through the corners, you watch the Miura go through, the Aston Martin DB5, the E-Type and so on. They all were not particularly comfortable with the corners. They all leaned a lot. They weren't the easiest of cars to drive. So this myth that the American muscle cars were terrible through the corners, yeah, they're worse than modern cars. There's no doubt about that, but everything from the 60s is. One of the 60s cars are going to be worse than the modern sports cars and so on. They really weren't that much worse. They weren't, if any, worse through the corners than the cars they were going up against. They put up a very, very good fight, even around the likes of Lime Rock. You know, they were putting up a really good fight at carrying the corner speed. So, there we go. Yeah, American muscle cars, they're not the easiest things in the world to drive, certainly, but when compared against the vehicles from the time period, they really weren't that bad. And consider this, you know, the American muscle cars were far, far cheaper than the likes of the Lamborghini Miura and Ferrari Daytona that we're racing them against. Yeah, the muscle cars, they're really rather impressive vehicles, I have to say. But, there we go. That is it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.